Welcome to the Money and Mortgages podcast. I'm your host, Adam Coleman, accredited financial counselor and mortgage planner. Join me as I speak with fellow industry experts on all things personal finance. Welcome, everyone. This is Adam Coleman, and with me today I have Myles Zueger, and he's a certified financial planner with Adams Wealth Partners in Nashville, Tennessee. Their slogan is "Retire while you work." So we're going to discuss that a little bit more detail, but certainly it gravitates towards me just because I kind of like the FIRE movement. If you're not familiar with that, it's financial independence, retire early. So I'm kind of curious to see how that kind of matches up to the retire while you work concept. But I'm excited to talk through all this and hopefully find ways to break out of that kind of mindset that we all seem to have where we're trudging through life, kind of dealing with all the constant grind of work, hoping that one day we can have enough money to stop working forever and retire. So I think this will be a mindset shift, which we probably all would benefit from. So Myles, welcome to the show and thanks for being here.
Yeah, excited to be on with you today. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess jumping right in, what was the inspiration for the slogan, retire while you work?
Yeah, so this was something that was started by our founder, David Adams, maybe, I don't know, 10 or 15 years ago, a little earlier on in his career. And the inspiration really behind it was just looking at the retirement landscape in general and seeing a broken system to where the old kind of way that people worked was they work and say, hey, when I turn 65, that's when I'm going to start traveling. That's when I'm going to have all these hobbies. And what we saw was that people worked till they were 65. They had no hobbies. They didn't like to travel, and they had lost all their purpose because their whole life was tied to their work and the job they did. I mean, it came up in a meeting the other day. It's like, especially amongst men, I feel like the first time guys meet each other, like one of the first things we say is, hey, what do you do? It's like, what's your name and what do you do? And so it's like people and females as well are just so tied to their purpose, to what they do for work. And so it was just looking at the system and saying, this is broken. Like we need to, life's short. We need to focus on living while we're here, while our health is good, doing things that we enjoy, spending time with those we love, doing things with the people that we love. And so really the philosophy was born out of that concept.
Nice. Well, and I mentioned the FIRE movement. So I think this sort of tends towards that same direction of the concept. I know FIRE says retire early, but I think the main concept of it is more the financial independence piece of it, where you could retire if you wanted to. Yours may differ a little bit just because you're not necessarily talking about stopping working. So I guess where do the disconnects come from between what your firm is kind of focused on and more of the FIRE movement?
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely very similar. I think if you look at the FIRE movement as a whole, and to your point, if you kind of leave the retire early part in there, that's where I think we differ. Is retire while you work isn't necessarily trying to retire early. The whole purpose is just to get to enjoying what you're doing. So if you're in your 70s and you're still working, it's our hope that that's only because you truly enjoy your job and what you do. And maybe you're not doing it full time. Maybe you're doing it. Maybe if you were, working 40 or 50 hours a week, you've now cut back and maybe you're working 15 or 20, or you're not even where you were for the majority of your career, but you're now doing some consulting work. So I think the biggest difference between the two is just not having it so much tied to retirement. It's really just about doing what you enjoy doing, even if that involves working. I mean, there's probably a lot of people out there that would say working is one of their hobbies. Like they just enjoy what they do. They truly love what they do. And I think that's what everybody should probably strive for. But there are parts of all jobs that you just don't love. I mean, there's parts of my job I don't love. I'm sure you have parts of your job that you don't love. I think we all have that. But just getting to the point where it's like, if you're only working when you're in your 60s, 70s, it's because you truly enjoy doing that. But as a whole, I think the two concepts are very similar.
Nice. Yeah, and I think a lot of people, they have that part in their name, but it's more, I guess, work optional is probably how a lot of people view it. I mean, true financial independence, you don't necessarily have to work, but you just do it because you enjoy it. And like you said, kind of part-time work would certainly fit into that, which is certainly a good option to have as well for people.
Yeah.
But I guess real world, what questions are you kind of going through, and other planners at your firm obviously are asking clients to really kind of uncover those goals that they want to kind of retire in their minds while they work? So what are the main things that you're asking?
Yeah, I think it's just really about like going deep with clients and trying to figure out like what truly is important to them. Like where do they want to be spending their time? Who do they want to be spending their time with? What kind of hobbies do they have? that they want to be spending more time on. Before our first client meeting with anybody, our first prospect meeting, we have most people fill out a questionnaire. And sometimes people will put on there like, I think we maybe have, when do you want to retire? And a lot of people will say now, or 50 or 55, or throw a number out there. And we get into the meeting and we say like, why do you want to retire at 50? And they're just like, I hate what I do. Or I don't know, I don't want to die at my desk, kind of thing. And so we're asking questions trying to get to, is it because you just truly want to retire and maybe you can afford that in your early 50s? Or is it because you hate your job? And how can we help you to put a plan together that does get you out of your job, but maybe gets you doing something else? Maybe you still need some income, so you find an opportunity doing some volunteer work with a nonprofit that pays a little bit of money, or you shift and go find a totally different role that has a decent income, allows you to keep doing what you're doing. The other part of the question on there is, how much money do you need to retire? And I think with inflation, you could argue it's higher now, but forever the number was $1 million. And people would say, yeah, when I have $1 million, I'm going to retire. And we're like, well, where'd that number come from? And people were like, I don't know. I read it in a newspaper. I heard it online or something like that. And it's like, that number is so subjective. I mean, we have clients who have, a couple $100,000, they have a pension, they have Social Security, and we send them maybe $1,000 a month and they're happy as is. And there's people, believe it or not, that have, 20, 30, $40 million that feel like they can't retire because their expenses are so high. They have 4 houses around the world, and with the bills, they just can't make things work. So, to answer your original question, I think it's just about going deeper with people and asking questions to figure out like what is important to you. Where do you want to be spending your time? What do you enjoy doing? Who do you want to be spending it with? What does retirement look like to you? And just really digging into those.
Is there like a specific question that you frame to kind of get them on the mindset of, all right, if I didn't have to work, what would you be doing? Or is it really just so many different questions that you kind of go through with that questionnaire? Is there one that kind of sparks that light bulb in people's mind to go, yeah, this is really what I would love to do, and this is how I envision retirement in my mind?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much the question you laid out there. It's really like, if in a perfect world, where would you be spending your time if you didn't have a work obligation? What would you be doing? And I think that's where people are like, oh, if I wasn't working, I'd go and I'd volunteer at this nonprofit a few hours a week, and I'd be able to pick the kids up from school and take them to school. And, I'd have time for a date night with my spouse. And so it's like, through asking questions like that, it's like you start to figure out where people want to be spending their time. Because I think a lot of times you just kind of get caught up in the rat race, and you wake up, you get the kids ready, you take them to school, you go work all day, you pick them up, you come home, cook dinner, and it feels like it's that cycle over and over. So yeah, questions like that are great examples of helping people uncover that.
Nice. Well, what are some, I guess, real world examples of things that people actually do that you've run into, like clients, where they've considered themselves retired, but obviously still working? But what does that look like in terms of real world examples?
Yeah, I think one of the bigger ones, there's a couple that we have seen. And I think one of the more reoccurring ones that we see out there is kind of tied to vacations. So it's like, and mostly like grandparents who, it's like a big goal of theirs is they want to take the whole family on a vacation. That's expensive, obviously. Maybe that costs $50,000 or $60,000, but the memories that are created from that last so much longer and are so much better than, a $10,000 they maybe would have given that grandkid at some point when they passed away. So I think vacations are a big one. We see people, obviously within budget and being able to afford that, but taking the whole family on a vacation, more so like the grandparents taking their kids and their grandkids on a trip like that. The other one that we've seen is a couple doctors that are clients of ours that worked at a hospital. They both worked at the same hospital, but barely ever saw each other because they were working, 60, 70 hours a week, super busy, maybe saw each other on the weekends. And we sat down with them, and they were in their early 40s at the time. And we were just kind of like, what's important to you guys? Like, basically the question you asked, like, in a perfect world, like, what would you guys be doing? Like, we'd be traveling together. We would actually have time to see each other and feel like we were actually married to each other. And so through that, we sat down with them and used some software that we have to put a plan together. And what they ended up doing is they started a small business that they're passionate about. So they have some income coming in from that. When they're traveling, which they do quite a bit, they rent their house out on Airbnb. So they have some income coming in from there. And then the rest of it, they were doctors. They were very successful. They were able to save up a good amount of money, and they are able to live off some of their investments as well. So for them, it's kind of income coming in from 3 different sources. I think that's one of our bigger kind of success stories, if you want to call it that, of people Because I mean, I don't think you hear that too often. Two successful doctors that quit in their early 40s because, I think you hear of doctors being stressed all the time, but none of them, just with bills and life and kids, aren't able to do that. But it's like these two just sat down and they're like, what's important to us? And they're like, spending more time with us is at the core of what's important to us. And they were able to, with our help, put a plan together to be able to start doing what they're doing. And now they're like happier than ever and not traveling and enjoying their small business, which has become pretty successful as well.
Is the small business anything related to the physician work or doctor work at all, or is it completely
No,
separate?
no, it's completely separate. It's without divulging too much to people, in
Sure.
case some clients listen to this, but it is kind of more like in the entertainment space, I would say. Like,
Interesting.
it was like a complete hobby of theirs, basically, that they were able to turn into a small business.
Did they struggle with the mindset shift of like going from being like high paid, working all the time doctors to trying to do this? Like, how do they get over that block that I think most people have is they're so used to making a good salary and they're just like, I don't want to give this up, even though it's stressful. Are there things that they did or that you all did to kind of help get them past that block?
Yeah, I think there was certainly some of that. I think that's natural, would have some of that. I think they were just so stressed and burnt out though, that the weight of not having that over their head and on their shoulders like far outweighed anything from a drop in income that they saw.
Had they built up so much of investments where the small business didn't necessarily have to make a lot of money and it was more of a bonus? Or did you kind of have to build the assumption in that, all right, you have to make this amount to make your plan work with your small business? Is that doable? Or was it really more kind of like fun money in their case?
I would say a little bit of both. I mean,
Yeah,
they weren't somebody who had like tens of millions of dollars saved up by any
sure.
means. They had done well, but really they were, yeah, we were like, hey, if you can have, you know, X amount coming in from a small business and you can try and stick to around, a 3 or 4% of withdrawal from your portfolio and rental income, which I think they had already been doing some of the rental income. So they kind of knew where that would come in at. They had a decent idea of what they could get from that. And we're like, if you can continue that and maybe increase it a little bit. And the biggest thing is if your expenses can stay at this level. It's like you can't go from, if you're telling us you can live on $100,000, like you guys are young. It needs to stay close to that number. You guys can't have a year where you blow it out and go spend, $400,000 or $500,000. It's like the expense piece is what's really important. It's like if you have this much income coming in and withdrawals from a portfolio can stay around this level, but your expenses really have to stay closer to this, because if they start to creep up, this will become unsustainable for you guys at some point.
Gotcha. Do you get more involved in kind of the budgeting piece and like previous spending just to kind of nail down exactly what's realistic for people like that to go through?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah. I mean, in that scenario, it's very important that like you're not just guessing, because we have clients come in sometimes and they're like, oh, I spend, $7,000 a month. And we're like, well, are you factoring in the mortgage in that? Are you factoring in, is that everything? Is that school tuition, et cetera? And they're like, no, I don't really think of those two. So yeah, we definitely had to like drill down and say, like we need like a good budget number so that we're not just sticking our finger up and seeing which way the wind's blowing. Let's like lock this in. And then it looked great. And they've been able to stick to that. I think that was probably 4 or 5 years ago that they kind of made that big shift, and they're happier than ever.
nice. Well, you mentioned obviously physicians as a specific profession that something like this could work on. Obviously, there's more room to work with if you have a lot of income and you have a lot of investments already saved up. But are there other specific professions that you've run across that can take advantage of this better than others? I think it's obviously disingenuous to think that this is going to work perfectly for everybody.
Yeah.
Some people just don't have the flexibility to do that. But who do you see as kind of the prime candidates for this method?
Yeah, I think the easiest kind of group of people for it to happen to, I mean, no surprise, is somebody who owns a small business or is more of an independent contractor. I mean, their schedule's way more flexible. They can kind of set their own hours. They can have a better idea of deciding how much they want to make. If it's like a real estate agent who's just blown out of the water, working 70 hours a week and making, 7 figures a year, they may choose to say, hey, I'm only going to work 25 hours a week, but I can still make a decent 6-figure income and kind of be in that level. When you get to the W-2 earners, it is a little bit tougher. I think that's where a bigger shift comes into it. That's where somebody needs to decide like, hey, I'm going to maybe go the consulting route so I have a little bit more flexibility over my schedule, or I'm going to have the conversation with my employer of like, what's important to me, am I able to have more of a hybrid schedule where I can work some remote, some in office? I think that's easier now over the last 4 or 5 years than it has been due to COVID to have that flexibility. I know there's kind of a lot of return to office movement coming in now, but being able to have that conversation with your employer and say, hey, I really want to do a little bit more traveling. Would it be possible for me to do that and work remotely some? I mean, that's a scary conversation for people to have, right? I mean, there's the chance that like you lose out on future promotions and raises, et cetera. And if there's layoffs, you may be in that first line, but it's deciding what's important to you and saying, I'm willing to give up some of the future prospects of where my career was maybe headed for what's important and being able to travel more and spend time with those. So yeah, much easier for 1099 earners, but I think for W-2 earners, that's more of a conversation of sitting down and really deciding what's important to you.
What have you seen some specific examples of what people have done, I guess, that are kind of that 8 to 5 W-2 full-time position? They may only have weekends to deal with, or they may only have kind of their standard PTO or whatever like that. But are there things that you've seen people kind of successfully build, maybe like a mini version of the retire to work, like where you're taking advantage of the weekends or vacation time, but not necessarily able to change your actual work schedule? Have you seen that come up at all with clients?
Yeah, so I think the biggest one is maybe people who are in like the last maybe half or third of their career. It's just somebody who's maybe in their, early to mid 50s is really switching to that consulting route and finding a way to make a similar income, but make their hours a little more flexible. And maybe that means they only work for 8 to 10 months out of the year and have a couple months totally off. So they're able to do some of that traveling. The other one, to your point, is maximizing weekends. So retire while you work doesn't mean you need to like have the flexibility to go out and take a month-long trip and travel through Europe or Asia or something like that. Maybe it's a long 3-day weekend. I mean, I've seen the stuff online before of the people who have like figured out how to maximize, like if you're working off like a bank holiday schedule, they maximize using bank holidays with PTO. If you look it up, I'm sure you can find like a video out there. But basically, an example would be if you're on a bank holiday schedule, President's Day was a couple weeks ago now. So it's like you have that Monday off. So you take the previous Friday off. So now you just gave yourself a 4-day weekend and only had to use 1 day of PTO. So it's getting creative like that and just trying to maximize if you have a couple weeks, 2 or 3 weeks of PTO, being able to maximize those dates by trying to combine them with them. I think a little more easily done for somebody who's probably earlier and younger in their career.
Right. Well, yeah, and we talked about this a little bit before, but I guess what other methods are you all using to kind of balance that mindset shift? Because obviously everybody's kind of in that accumulation stage that you're tending to work with because they haven't retired officially yet. What methods are you using to kind of get them over that hump to where they don't have to think that they've got to accumulate all this wealth to build up this huge nest egg to retire at some point? Are there methods that you all have used to try to help people with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it just comes back to, I know I said this a couple of times now, but just really helping people to find what's important to them. I mean, is passing away with $5 million in your bank account what's important to you, or and leaving your kids or grandkids or whoever it may be a big inheritance? Is that like truly what's important to you? Or would you rather have done everything that you wanted to do while you were alive, took all the trips you wanted to take, spent all the time with your kids and your grandkids and friends, and instead of passing with $5 million, maybe you have $1 million that you're able to leave the kids? When we're meeting with people and especially doing some of this heavy planning, that's one kind of point we bring up to people. It's like, you can do this and you can pass away with this money, but I would say the vast majority of our clients fall under the decision of, no, I want to like take all the trips I want to take. I want to spend all the time with those that I love. And if I leave the kids something, like they're successful, they're doing well, they're not going to need this money. I would like to leave them something, but it's not, that's not my top priority. Taking care of me and my spouse or whoever it may be is priority number one. And I think the biggest thing is making sure that the kids understand that and that there's maybe not any large inheritance coming their way so that there's no issues there down the road. And I think that's, taking the trip, we're always in favor of that, assuming it's an affordable thing to do, obviously.
To finish up everything, but what methods are you kind of using to build that into the financial plan? Because this is hard, I would say. I mean, I think some people can get by with DIY investing and things like that, but this is a different mindset shift where you really do kind of have to nail down the numbers in order to get comfortable with the fact that you're doing that. So like, what does that look like? Are you kind of building in lump sum amounts into your plan? Like, all right, you can spend $15,000 for this vacation. Here's what this looks like for your long-term goals. Or are you building it in kind of like a monthly amount that you're kind of building up a separate nest egg for these specific vacation goals? What does that look like?
Yeah. So, I mean, through meeting with clients, we're able to tell like, hey, like traveling is important to them, or this hobby is important to them, or whatever it may be. We have a software called GPM, goal planning and monitoring, that we're able to use with folks to kind of plug all that information in there. It's obviously much easier when not much easier, but I feel like the data is a little bit better when somebody's in their 50s or 60, because there's a little bit, you're getting closer to kind of call it the end goal of maybe
Right.
retiring there. It's a lot of projections based if you're early on in somebody's life. But yeah, with that, we're able to say, okay, you're telling us that you do want to retire at 55. Let's say somebody's maybe 40 right now. So we're saying, okay, if that's what's important to you, from 40 to 55, here's about how much you need to try and save every year. And it doesn't mean it needs to be a set amount, but maybe when a bonus comes in or something like that, you're able to throw a big chunk of that towards investments, or you're allocating some of that to some rental properties so that you have some monthly income coming in from that when you retire. And the other big piece of that is back to the expenses. So it's like, if 55 is important to you, you need to basically be spending what you're spending now. You can't retire at 55 and then have this huge vacation budget just because you want to. It's the budgets need to be about where they're at in most times early on, especially when somebody's age 65. And the biggest reason there is because of healthcare expense. People don't quite realize. I think we're inflating that expense like 6%, which has been on average over the last few years. So it's like, if somebody wants to retire at 55 or even 60, and there's a 5 or 10-year gap there between when they're on Medicare, that healthcare expense is so big that it actually prevents some people from retiring. But what we have seen some people do is they said, like, they've done well, they've built up enough investments. What we've seen some clients do is they go get a job at Home Depot working 30 hours a week because they're full-time and they have health insurance, and they don't necessarily need the income, but it keeps them plugged in, keeps them engaged, which, I mean, all the studies show that's like what's important, especially when you're looking at maybe Alzheimer's or some disease like that down the road. And like, they're able to earn a little bit of money that they can supplement where they used to be. But the biggest thing that they're getting out of that is the health insurance.
Yeah.
So again, but to tie it back to the software, it is kind of like, yeah, you need to have a plan in place. Like, the money is important. Obviously, to retire, you need to have some money to live on there. Like, that's without a doubt important. But the biggest thing that we try to lead with is the financial plan. And here's what somebody's telling us they want to do. Can we kind of back into the numbers to say, okay, conservatively, here's where we need to be at for you to achieve these goals that you're telling us are important to you, and really where you want to be at in 5 or 10 years.
Nice. Well, I was going to ask about any kind of big pitfalls that people could have. You mentioned a big one, obviously, with the health insurance. Anything else that people, top of mind, need to kind of have in mind before they think about, obviously, switching from, a full-time W-2 job to more of a consulting role? Anything that you've seen that people maybe screw up on that have caused problems for them?
Yeah, I think it's lack of a budget, not really knowing how much they're actually spending. I think a lot of people think they have a good idea. When they get into it, there's several things that they're not factoring in. So we try to be good about factoring in, things people don't think about, like maybe HVAC goes out and there's, 5 or 10 grand on something like that, or you got to put a new roof on the house, and there's 20 grand. So factoring in those big expenses that don't necessarily take place every few years to build those into the budget. Healthcare is obviously the big one. I think the other big one is long-term care. So looking later on in life, I mean, just to give an idea to people, to be in like a private room, which I think is what most people would prefer if they were having to have that level of care, not having to share. You're looking at, in Tennessee, where I'm located, like 7,000 or 8,000 a month for a private room. So you're looking at, 100 grand basically. And so if you don't have coverage or haven't built up assets to be able to self-insure, I mean, that can drain people pretty quickly. But if somebody maybe has some equity in a house, you can pull that out to be able to fund some as well. So you can get creative on that. But I think, yeah, healthcare is just the biggest one because it's so expensive, and it's only getting more expensive with more and more people needing it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think those are perfect examples. So, well, this has been perfect. I really appreciate you taking the time. If anybody would like to learn more about you and your firm, what's the best place to go?
Yeah, you can find us at adamswealthpartners.com. And then same thing, we're all over Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram with all those same names as well.
Nice. Well, Myles, it's been a pleasure. I appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me on today, and it was great to chat with you.
Yeah. All right. Thanks.